of Public Safety and Criminal Justice. I'm joined today by the President of the City Council and co-sponsor of this order number, docket number 0625, Councillor Campbell. I'm also joined by my colleague from South Boston, Councillor Ed Flynn. I want to remind everybody that this is a public hearing. It's being recorded and broadcast on Comcast 8 and RCN 82, Verizon 1964, and it's also being streamed live on boston.gov. Please silence your cell phones and other devices. We'll be taking public testimony and would appreciate if you sign and check in the box over to my left, your right. I'll open with just a quick statement and welcome everybody again to the Christopher Ianello Chamber. We've also been joined by Councillor Kim Janey. I just want to welcome all of the staff from our first responders in Boston, which are second to none in my opinion. So as we continue on, I just want to show that greeting. So without further ado, I will introduce co-sponsor of this, President Andrea Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy, and thank you for your partnership on this. I also want to thank the agencies that are represented today, Chief Hooley, Commissioner Finn. I know Commissioner Evans couldn't be with us today. He'll be here for a later hearing. So Michael Gaskins, thank you for being here as a diversity officer for BPD. Danielson, thank you, Chief of Diversity, thank you for being here. Trin, thank you for being here and the work that your department does. Juan, thank you for being here, as well as the staff that are sitting in the chamber. I also want to thank the advocates who are representing various organizations who are also here. Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, Michael Devon, who represents many of the veterans, not just in the city of Boston, but Massachusetts. The goal of this hearing is to include as many folks as possible and to make sure that we're not framing this as an issue of people of color versus veterans or people of color versus women. The goal is quite simple, to make sure that this is a series of conversations, a series of hearings, policy briefings, however we want to refer to them, to get to short-term and long-term goals to change the numbers currently within our public safety agencies so that they're more reflective and representative of the demographics of the city of Boston. I know there are a lot of protected categories. Frankly, I'm only focusing on 2 for now, and taking on specifically women and folks of color, and how do we develop short-term and long-term solutions to change the numbers in our public safety agencies. This conversation, this first hearing, is an opportunity, one, to hear from the agencies, one, what the numbers are, what diversity means. I sort of submitted some questions you could look at, what it means to your agency, what initiatives you have been working on, some of which I think aren't known to the public, many folks don't know about, what you think the barriers are, and that will hopefully set the context for further conversations on developing solutions that are short-term, long-term, and also defining those solutions in a certain way. Some of these things may be within the power and the control of the city of Boston. Others may be within the power and control of the state. And so we want to make sure we define that, because obviously we have authority at the city level. We do not have authority at the state level. We can advocate, but sometimes we send things up there and they just die. So how can we as a collective make this issue a priority and also work on things as a collective to make sure the numbers change and aren't the same, say, in 2, 3, 5, or 10 years. I look forward to being a partner in this work. And I'm only in my second term, but I've built some great relationships with the folks sitting here, as well as many of your team members. And I appreciate the work you guys do every single day. Like I often tell, I think Commissioner Finn and Chief Hooley and Commissioner Evans, when something happens in the city of Boston that is heinous or disturbing, folks don't call me, they call you guys. You guys are in the front lines along with the women that serve with you. And so I respect and appreciate your service and look forward to just having this conversation today and also being respectful of folks' time. So I'm going to stop here. But thank you, Councilor McCarthy, for your partnership. Thank you, Councilor Flynn and Councilor Janey, for being here.
Councilor Ed Flynn, you have any opening statements?
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy, and thank you to Councilor Campbell, Councilor McCarthy, for sponsoring this hearing. Boston is a vibrant and diverse city. I'm excited to join this hearing, work together to see how we can ensure our emergency and government services can best work together. I also know that under Mayor Walsh that progress has been made, and I'm looking forward to being part of the dialogue. I also want to thank our first responders for what you do every day and every night. Boston's lucky to have such a great and dedicated, diverse group of people that serve our city every day. And I'm fairly new to the city council, but I know the great work that your organizations have done for so many years across the city. So I'm looking forward to learning more about the issues and how we all can work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Janey?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both, Councilor Campbell and Councilor McCarthy, for sponsoring this hearing and as well as for your leadership on this committee. Certainly want to thank the panel, certainly our first responders for all of the work that you do. I too am new to the City Council, but not new to the issues of racial justice. And like Councilor Campbell, very concerned about how our city is doing in terms of being inclusive and making sure that our city departments really reflect the rich diversity of our city in terms of making sure that there's gender equity as well as more diversity in terms of people of color. So I'm interested in learning more about what is happening now, whether or not that is yielding results, and what ideas we have moving forward. So thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Councilor. So we'll open it up to the panel. I think you're going to start. Sure. So we'll start this way and kind of go down. If you can just introduce yourself, your affiliation, and then your opening statement, and we'll move it along.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Madam President, Councilors Janey and Flynn. Danielson Tavares, Chief Diversity Officer. Just a quick synopsis. My role is simply, so as Chief Diversity Officer, my role is ensuring that the City of Boston workforce is as reflective of the people as we serve. Just for context, roughly 37% of our workforce were persons of color at the start of our administration in 2014. And since that, about 44% of our hires have been people of color. So I think we're doing pretty well when it comes to diversity. I think we struggle in specific areas. I know there's some areas we've done better than others. For example, our public safety offices, which have their own challenges in terms of, as the councilor mentioned, having some state hurdles that we sort of need to get around. So we do recognize there are challenges. We have been proactive in those areas. For example, in the Boston Police Department, we just launched our second cadet program. The first cadet program was roughly 67% kids of color. And I know we have a recruit class, which is one of the largest classes we've had when it comes to diversity, following in and followed by a second cadet class that will be coming in. So we feel like we've got a good pipeline coming in to be at BPD. But there's still some areas that we continue to sort of think about how do we continue to diversify. And one of the questions here is simply how do you define diversity? And I think for me it's just the recognition that every individual is different, and that's just not sort of on race. That can be on ethnicity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic statuses, physical disabilities, religious beliefs. So we're sort of always keeping that in mind as we sort of develop our policies. One thing we've done to sort of ensure that we increase diversity is we're one of the first cities in the country to have a public-facing dashboard in terms of being able to access our workforce demographics. So if you go to cityofboston.gov/diversity, you can see how we break down on every department based on race, salary, gender, and tenure. And that information is auto-generated, so you can always go up and see sort of how we are in terms of diversity. The other thing we've done is sort of we've launched these quarterly reports that simply states in the last 90 days, here's how your department has done in terms of diversity. We found that sort of keeping sort of this focus has sort of forced our colleagues to, when there are openings, reach out to the diversity office. So I think it's created this sort of partnership. That's what we've done on the numbers end, but I still think sort of we've got to figure out how do we continue to have a conversation around what it means to have an inclusive workforce, a diverse workforce, and how do we make sure that our managers understand the challenges that our sort of workforce deals with every day. Just a quick sort of announcement. I'm happy to announce that this morning the mayor announced a $500,000 plan to have workforce sensibility training included in the next year's budget. This funding will support expanded training on racial and gender bias, sexual harassment, and employee awareness through initiatives such as workshops for employees and managers, hiring facilitators to lead discussions on these important issues, and updating policies and training manuals. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilor Campbell, Councilor Janey, Councilor Flynn, Chief Diversity Officer Tavares, and Chief Finn. Pleasure to be here. My name is Michael Gaskins. I'm the new Diversity Recruitment Officer for the Boston Police Department and Exam Administrator. My job is solely to recruit officers and cadets for the Boston Police Department. This is the first time the department has had a dedicated position in response to the community's cry or need for diversity. We do a lot of outreach. We work with our partners, including the Boston Fire and Workforce Development. We meet regularly with the Diversity Office, the city's Diversity Office, on several initiatives. We are pleased, as Mr. Tavares mentioned, to be launching our second cadet pool coming up this summer. The cadet program is a 2-year program, paid training for young men and women, civilian positions within the city. Upon completion of the 2 years and the successful passing of the civil service exam, the commissioner has the ability to add cadets up to a third to any recruit class going forward after the 2 years of service. Gives us a great opportunity to address certain neighborhoods that might be underserved in terms of representation within the force, as well as work directly with some of our pipeline programs like English High, Madison Park, where they have Explorer programs and law enforcement curriculum that's specific to the department. I've been at the department for a little bit over a year. I sat with the commissioner and I asked him, can we change the mission statement, and what would it take? Would we need to convene the board? What do we need to do? And he told me, Michael, write it, and we'll make that our mission statement. So I just kind of enhanced the mission statement to include the Boston Police Department is dedicated to working in partnership with the community to fight crime, reduce fear, and improve the quality of life in our neighborhoods. Our mission is community policing with a desire and a commitment to be a reflection of the residents we serve, acknowledging our collective power and responsibility to create a culture and inclusive environment that mirrors the best of us all. So we do have a desire to be a reflection of the people that we serve, and we look forward to speaking more and sharing about the strategic initiatives that we've taken in the last year or so. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael. Commissioner Finn, welcome.
Thank you, Council, and Councilor Campbell, Councilors Janey, and Councilor Flynn. Certainly the Boston Fire Department shares those values. We certainly need to be representative of the community we serve. Diversity is the #1 priority with us on a human relations standpoint. We have hired our Chief Diversity Officer, Juan Sanchez, and I'm going to go through a little bit, then I'm going to turn it over to Juan. Juan can talk a little bit more specifically about the specific programs we have underway and what we're looking to accomplish with these programs. But I certainly want the council to understand my position on this. I certainly have diversity, gender equality, certainly prime concerns of mine. I know that we want to be, and we want to be that department that is completely reflective of the community we serve. We do have some challenges around state law and things around things that put us a little more unique than the police department. And there's barriers, if you will, to some programs, and we need to start thinking about how best we do that. For the council, I just want you to know that I am truly committed to the diversity of the department, and we're going to be, working diligently over the course of time to make sure that occurs. And we do have some really groundbreaking initiatives that are underway right now that I'll let Juan explain some of them and bring you through that. Juan?
You have one?
Oh.
Did you go down the line, or?
No, we can jump.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
Good morning, councilors, Councilor Flynn, Councilor Janey, Councilor McCarthy, Council President Campbell. So just really briefly, just to go off of what the commissioner said, we definitely feel the same and have the same values as the police department and the Chief of Diversity, Donnie Tavares' office here. Being the first position in the Boston Fire Department, and it being such a new position, resources were very limited in the beginning. So moving forward, I think, Commissioner Finn has made a commitment towards diversity by, increasing our budget for the diversity element. And then also we have different things to kind of increase and be out in the community, be more visible, starting with our teen academy. Those are one of the things those are really one of the main focuses that we're really focusing on, because we feel that reaching out to our youth are important, especially when we have such, I wouldn't say restrictive, but we have such really tough requirements to get on the job as far as military preferences and this and that. So we feel if we reach them at a younger age, we can really reach out and really make an effect, and I feel like that would benefit us moving forward in the future. That's a kind of our long-term strategy for us. Short-term, I think being visible, being out in the community for us is important. I think, partnering up with community facilities through youth development, youth engagement, through sports, I think those are all important. Moving forward into the new school year, we have an Explorers program that we're kind of revamping, which is something that we had in the past. We're going to kind of use, we're working with Boston Police to kind of increase our awareness and our visibility in the schools, because they're pretty active in the schools. So we feel that that's another place where we could do some great recruitment for us. Moving forward, again, we have a lot of partnerships with military personnel, different military branches, recruit military, the MEPS building, processing. Again, we feel like those are short-term because we're reaching out to basically new recruits that are coming out or going into the military. So we feel if we can reach them at that point, we have a quicker turnaround as far as the return of our recruitment strategy. And that's pretty much, we have several other things. I don't know if I can cut it short and we can get into it if.
Whatever you feel comfortable with.
Okay. Okay. We have a partnership with ABCD and BCYF, which is for our teen fire academy. This is the second year. Last year was our pilot program. We started off with 22 students, all from inner city, all with the ABCD through our partnership with the ABCD. We also, this year, we're adding another 20 students, up to 40. We're partnering up with BCYF as well. So we have kids from ABCD and BCYF that are going to be included in this teen academy. Again, the commissioner has kind of made a commitment to the teen academy, and he feels, this is a great recruitment tool for us. And we have a community engagement element to it, where we have kids go out into the community, Greater Boston Food Bank, give back to the community. The kids get an idea of what it's like to be on the actual Boston Fire Department. They go to the fire academy. They do functional skills training. This year we're partnering up with the Red Cross to get them CPR certified. And then those are all, the Red Cross partnership is fairly new. This is new this year. And then we get to take them out into the Marine unit and get to see all different elements of what it's like to be on the job, including a military week. So we have different branches of military come in, speak with the kids, talk about job opportunities that could not necessarily, that could translate into civilian. So I feel like that's important. A lot of the kids that we reach out to aren't really aware of the job opportunities that are in the military, so we feel like that's really important. To get an idea that if they do get a job in the military, it can translate into civilian life. And that's pretty much, that's all I have for now.
Okay. Thanks. Keep on going.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Councilor Campbell, Councilor McCarthy, Councilor Janey, and Councilor Flynn for bringing us together to talk about this very important issue. And while the city is not perfect and all of the work that we do is not perfect, I think it's really important to continue the dialogue to make sure that this is a priority, and we can also communicate back to you on some of the efforts that we're doing within the city departments and Mayor Walsh's administration at the same time. So thank you for coordinating this hearing. My name is Trin Nguyen, and I'm the director of the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development. I'm sure that I've spoken to many of you about our departments and about work, so I don't want to take my time to talk about the overall general mission of our office. I also want to thank my panelists who are here, just because we have worked closely, our office and our team has worked closely with every department that you see here and others who are not here as well. And there's no one size fits all. And so we work with a tailored approach. And I wanted to thank all the leadership and the representatives from these departments who have worked with us and rolled up their sleeves to develop various, caveats, policies, and even inform us and train us how their departments work so that we can work together on a more tailored approach. Our office is unique in a sense that our role is more of a pre-trainer, outreach, and pre-qualified entity and agency. We think we fit well within this continuum, and so within these partners, our office plays that role. We are the fiscal agent of two major one-stop career centers in the city of Boston, and those career centers have about 14,000 residents entering those community centers. We also have very strong partnerships and funding partnerships with 65 competitive nonprofit agencies that provide workforce training so that we can recruit from that base as well. We work very closely with over 320 employers so that we know where the low-wage workers are and that we can get them into these pipelines if they had the technical assistance, relationship, and direct pipelines into the industries and the departments that you see and hear here. And so the role we play is that kind of partnerships. For example, we just launched the City Academy, which you probably heard about. And some specific examples is that we have been working with Chief Hooley's office, the EMTs, to do a pre-apprenticeship and then an apprenticeship program into that pipeline so that Chief Hooley can get the talent that he needs, but more importantly, the racial and linguistic diversity that he needs with his workforce as well. We also have been working with the Department of Public Works to understand their workforce needs, for example, in heavy equipment operators and commercial driving licenses. And so we provide that technical assistance and that funding for Boston, pre-qualified Boston residents who's interested in that industry, pre-qualify them with the necessary licensure, and then direct them into that pipeline to be able to compete for the openings once they open up. So those are some examples in which we have a more tailored approach that provides qualified talent pool from Boston's neighborhoods as well. One last thought is we are working with the fire department and the Boston Police Departments we know that they have cadet training, and so what we think our role could be is to work with Boston Public Schools middle schools and high schools to do the career exploration, and also stipends in these, provide paid internships in these areas as a learning tool to get them interested in this field. And so that will help with the pre-pipeline into the cadet and outreach programs as well. And last but not least, this work is very hard work. It's long-term, but we want short-term gains too, as you can see some of the example work that we've been on the ground. By no means this is the answer and the solution, but this is a glimpse to let you know that we are working very hard on the ground to make short-term and long-term goals matter and happen for the city of Boston. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trin. Chief, good to see you again, and I will say that I was at the swearing in and promotion ceremony on Monday, and the classes did look very diverse from what I could see. So congratulations and congrats on the new classes as well. Chief Hooley?
No, thank you, and thanks for your attendance. I know, Councilor Campbell, you had planned to come, and at the last minute something came up, and I certainly relayed that you wished you had been with us. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me here today, too. I'm sorry, Madam President and the rest of the councilors, good morning. There was something you were saying in your opening statement, Councilor, about just getting the conversation going. And even just getting the request for information as you and Councilor McCarthy were putting the order together, and the different information you asked for during the budget hearing was a good place to get the conversations continuing. Although I will say it did start a long time ago before that, but it is good to keep us all on point, to keep us focused on that. So we welcome that. So my name is Jim Woolley, and I'm the chief of Boston EMS, and next week will mark my 40th year with the department. Boston EMS was recently approved for 395 uniform positions and to support the provision of pre-hospital care for over 126,000 incidents per year, resulting in more than 86,000 transports last year. As referenced in the docket, 68% of our uniformed personnel identify as white, 13% black, 7% Hispanic, 1% Asian, and 9% have elected not to specify. A total of 32% of our personnel are female. Although I don't have a specific figure, we also have a large number of members who are bilingual. It's important to note that all uniformed personnel at Boston EMS started their employment as emergency medical technician recruits, but they must first hold EMT state certification prior to applying. All other ranks are filled through internal promotion. Thus, the ability of the department to hire a diverse workforce is constrained by the demographics of the eligible EMT applicant pool. So our first challenge is to get young people interested in becoming EMTs. And we've focused on that over the years in a lot of ways. One was we developed our own in-house community EMT class, which has been a pretty successful, probably our most successful route for getting young people from Boston's neighborhoods to get certified as an EMT and come to apply for us. But we also have worked with many of the commission programs, BAHEC, a lot of the summer programs at Boston Public Health Commission. We've worked with City Heroes program that's run in cooperation with the Transit Police and our department, Community Services, where we offer short classes, maybe 19 hours, basic first aid, CPR, and a few things just to give they're still adolescents before they're ready to make decisions like this, but to give them a taste, maybe try to give them some incentive to think about coming on with us. Last summer, we brought on we bring on interns when we can and when the budget allows. Last summer, we brought on an intern, a young African-American woman from Fields Corner. She was a 17-year-old high school student artist. With the idea of coming in and looking at our promotional material. What are we putting out? What are we missing in this? What's going to catch the eye of somebody her age, of somebody from her racial background? So trying to look at everything to try to attract people first. And then when it comes to our testing and recruiting we post examinations. We give sufficient notice for that. We set out the requirements of what people are going to have to do. For example, the minimum written score you'll need to move on to the practical, what's required in the practical exam, and then we offer review sessions for the written, for the practical. It's not required, but we encourage people to come because we want them to do well. I'd rather be having to interview 170 people for 20 positions than interviewing 30, as crazy as that sounds. I'd rather have that diverse group in front of us. So we do that, and then when we do get to the interview process, as my schedule permits, and I do prioritize it, I try to make every EMT candidate interview personally, along with the team. Our team always includes senior personnel. The last group, 3 are African-American. From the interview team, Latino, and 2 are women. It's imperative that we select candidates who have excellent clinical skills, embody professionalism, and will be able to relate to their patients, whether that is sharing the same race, gender, ethnic background, language, or just having a compassionate nature. Medical emergencies can be scary, and they're very high-stress occasions. The ability for a member of the department to allay the patient's fears and rapidly address the issue at hand is essential. And so we do prioritize candidates that we think will be able to do that at the interviews. Understanding that persons of color have a disproportionate burden of morbidity and mortality from medical conditions, we recognize the importance of having a diverse workforce and its role in improving health equity. That's a strategic priority for both our department and the Boston Public Health Commission, with the goal of health in all policies. And we can get into that more if you like. Through workforce diversity, we are able to provide more linguistically and culturally appropriate care for our patients. And just as important, we're able to educate each other. You know, speaking from experience over the years, when you're sitting with a partner for 8 hours in a truck whose family came from, you know, Cape Verde, who were there for second generation here, your partner, and they're able to translate. In the 8 hours, even when you're not taking care of a patient, you're learning from each other. The same way, whether it's you know, an Asian American or anybody else that you're working with, or the fact that, you know, you have a woman partner. You're learning the perspectives that they're bringing on every single call when they're telling you stories about their families and different things. And that helps us when we're in situations and we're trying to relate to people who may be reluctant to open up to us or to people in uniforms. So through workforce diversity, we were able to provide, I'm repeating that. And we were able to engage diverse communities in efforts to improve child car seat safety, CPR education, and emergency preparedness. In our public safety role, the trust that we build with communities across the city is very much influenced by our ties to the personnel who live in those communities. We need people to be able to trust us. Some cases are very obvious. Someone's got a broken leg, okay? But there's some cases where there may be subtle signs that perhaps there's been abuse going on or neglect, or maybe someone's even been the victim of human trafficking. And to get people to maybe open up or suspect it, they have to really be able to trust us. Many years ago, Boston EMS saw that the cost of an EMT certification was a barrier for residents, and it instituted a community EMT training program that I spoke of earlier. The course, which is offered twice a year, has been our most affordable option in the area, with fees that would just cover the books and our instructors' time. And it's been a consistent feeder of new hires. In the last 15 years, the percentage of personnel who identify as Asian, Black, or Hispanic has risen from 16 to 22%, which is a 37% increase. The number of women has increased by over 18% during this time period. While I'm proud to say that 9 out of our 20 EMTs that Council you saw graduate the other day, this past Monday, are female, one shy of 50-50, we as a department recognize there is more that we could do to enhance diversity within our department. This past year, we've been working closely with the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development to assist in strengthening the diversity of residents eligible to work for Boston EMS. Through their City Academy, the Office of Workforce Development is supporting an EMT career pathway for residents. They are actively pre-screening residents interested in employment with Boston EMS who meet basic hiring requirements. And with approximately over 300 applicants now, they have a difficult task ahead selecting 25 to participate in the upcoming Boston EMS EMT class, with all costs waived, as well as a 3-week bridge course prior to the start of the class, and an option for an internship after the course. Throughout the process, candidates will be offered mentorship and support, helping them pass the course and the exams and the hiring process. As a matter of fact, they're doing physical testing qualification today, where we saw them in my headquarters in our academy when I was on my way here today. Although the candidates will be subject to the same EMT hiring standards, we are confident that they will have every resource at their disposal to optimize their success. That EMT course starts August 14th, and I'll be happy to report back with the demographic breakdown of the participants in that City Academy program. We also will still have roughly 30 paying participants in that class, who for the first time will be prioritized for admission based on Boston residency. As part of the partnership with the Office of Workforce Development, Boston EMS has also secured approval from the state's Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development for our EMT course, our training program, to be recognized as a pre-apprenticeship, and that the Boston EMS EMT Academy to become certified as an apprenticeship. This will make the department eligible for funding sources earmarked for apprenticeships and help to establish articulation agreements with local colleges. In addition to efforts focused on strengthening the diversity of our EMT pool, Boston EMS also looks closely at the race and gender composition of those we promote. In the last training, captain, paramedic, and lieutenant promotions, we've seen positive steps in increasing the number of women and persons of color in more senior ranks. Boston EMS currently has 3 deputy superintendents, 2 training captains, 4 lieutenants, and 13 paramedics who are female, as well as our female medical director. Additionally, 1 superintendent, 2 deputy superintendents, 2 captains, 1 training captain, 6 lieutenants, and 6 paramedics from recent promotions all identify as persons of color. I'm confident that as we increase the diversity at the rank of EMT, we will continue to see impact in the more senior ranks. I appreciate your time and investment in this important topic, and happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Chief. We've also been joined by Councilor Edwards. Did you have an opening statement or anything?
No.
All right, good to go. All right. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy, and thank the panelists. Just for the record and folks who may not actually have these numbers in front of them, just quickly want to go through them for the record. So obviously the city of Boston's population is 46, this is based on BPD's recent data, 46.3% residents are white, 22.8% are black, 19% are Hispanic, 9.3% are Asian, 52% of the residents are female, and 37.1% of the residents speak a language other than English at home. For the 2,073 police officers, 67% are white, 22% are black, 9% are Hispanic, 2% are Asian, and 13% are female. For the 1,511 firefighters, 72% are white, 19% black, 8% Hispanic, less than 1% are Asian, and 1% are female. EMTs, I think you already said those numbers into the record, Chief, so I won't repeat them. And then lastly, going into the top tier ranks, which is really also a focus that we also need to make, sort of shine a light on, those numbers go down. For the police department, of the 121 lieutenants, captains, and superintendents, 86% are white, 12% are black, 2% are Hispanic, 1% are Asian, 7% are female. For the 367 or so fire department deputies, district chiefs, captains, lieutenants, 83% are white, 12% are black, 5% are Hispanic, I think 0 are Asian, and 0.3%, less than 1%, are female. For the 44 or so Boston EMS chiefs, superintendents, captains, and lieutenants, 73% are white, 18% are black, 9% are Hispanic, 0% are Asian, and 20% are female. I just wanted to state those numbers, and I want to thank the departments for getting those numbers to us. Starting with the Chief of Diversity, Tavares. So I know you mentioned the dashboard and the quarterly reports. Right now, if you look at the dashboard or the quarterly reports, you don't see these breakdowns. Yep. So you see the entire department, including civilians. Is there a way in which to include these numbers, specifically pulling out uniform officers?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I had to obviously email, and the departments were very responsive in getting this information. Yep. But I think if we're truly going to hold ourselves accountable, we should make it easily accessible. Yep. You can go on the website and find the quarterly reports, of course, the dashboard. But if we could make these numbers more transparent, I think that demonstrates that this is a priority and that we have work to do.
Yep. And just on that, yep. That's a recommendation that's also been made by others. So there has been specific requests made to update the dashboard to reflect additional information, including what you just referenced. So that's, yes, we could potentially do that, and I'll look into it.
Is there a reason we wouldn't necessarily make that available on the dashboards or
No,
quarterly
I
reports?
think when the dashboard was created, we focused on general numbers and
Okay.
weren't generally specifically thinking about our leadership, but that's something we can add as well. I don't see a reason why not.
Thank you. I think having the numbers of the uniformed officers and the top-tier positions is helpful. I think it puts us all on the same page, and we know what we're talking about, and you don't have to search or talk to everyone in the department to get those numbers readily available. Moving on to Michael Gaskins, obviously. Just to give you another opportunity to add some more, I'd love to hear from you, outside of your hiring, of course, and your freedom to do recruitment and other things, and I want to applaud you, particularly for the cadet program, the outreach, even the flyering looks different, so it's more user-friendly. People are coming forth and applying in higher numbers from various communities in the city of Boston, so thank you. But can you talk about other initiatives that the department's working on to change these numbers? I know in some of our meetings, we talked about language preference, we've talked about, obviously, the cadet program, other things you're working on. And then the second question to that is, what do you think are some of the barriers for you? And the third piece is, how do we measure, or what metrics do we use for the initiatives that we are deploying to see if they're actually having an impact on these numbers? And some of those metrics might take a little bit more time because the cadet program has obviously been reinstated recently, right?
Thank you very much. So I'll start with, in terms of what we're doing, we definitely have strategic initiatives for outreach. That includes partnerships with community programs. We're doing a lot of outreach and information sessions within the community organizations, BCYF, YMCA's, Boys and Girls Clubs. We're also partnering with the city on their career fair series. So we've participated pretty much in every one of their neighborhood career fair series. Again, outreach, making sure people understand the process. We worked with the city's Do It team to have our own website, which is boston.gov/police. Now you can click there and you can get more information on the process, taking the civil service exam, number of weeks or weeks in the academy. We even have links and resources back to civil service to prepare for the actual exam. You can also click on the cadet program too to give you a good overview. So our outreach definitely includes partnerships, as I mentioned before, with the Diversity Office as well as workforce development. We look forward to developing programming that might help with people preparing for the civil service exam, maybe even to offset some of the expenses that a cadet would incur in terms of tuition reimbursement, things of that nature. We look forward to those types of discussions. For our most recent class that graduated in April, we did a lot of outreach prior to the exam, as well as making sure that the people that took the exam understood the process, the hiring process. For the first time in a long time, we partnered with Civil Service, NBA Transit, and we had a joint session to go over the application process. Oftentimes, people don't understand. You take the test in 2017, you might not get a call until February of 2018, and what that entails, you get an email from the Civil Service to let you know that Boston Police is hiring, and then you're required to come and sign the list. If you miss that, you fail to respond to the vacancy, and then essentially you'd have to wait another 2 years in order to take the exam and get back on the cycle. So I think one of the things that we're trying to do is give the community more information about the application process. What we've also done in terms of partnerships, we received data from the Office of Immigration Advancement, as well as Boston Public Schools. We looked at 911 calls that required an officer to come with a language to translate, and we gathered that data and shared that information and made our case with the Civil Service, and we were able to get language certification, which allows us to add value to our existing applicant pool. The most recent pool that we had for 2017, we started with 130 applicants, 24 identified as white American, 74 identified as white American, constituting 56.9%, 29 African American, which constituted 22.3%, 21 Hispanic American, 16.2%, and 6 Asian American, which was 4.6%. For this particular pool, we also had 27 female recruits, which was 20% of our program. Our recruit class languages included Albanian, Cantonese, Cape Verdean Creole, French, Haitian Creole, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, and Spanish. Of those, again, we received the language certification for Cantonese, Vietnamese, Haitian Creole, Spanish. We asked for Cape Verdean, but were denied, and we look forward to continuing to ask for those, as our Cape Verdean population is very apparent in the Boston area. This year, we are in our process now as developing our recruit applicants and developing those profiles. We were granted the same number, 130. Mind you, we graduated 97 of the 130 last year. So we hope to improve on that number, but the numbers were pretty much the same, 59%, almost 60% white American, 21%, almost 22% African American, 15.4% Latino American, and then 3% Asian American. So we were granted permission to have a class of 130 this year as well. We were also given permission for the language certification. What's also important to note is our cadets are up on their 2-year of completion, so they'll be able to be added upon the commissioner's consent to any upcoming class. So we'll have another diverse pool. What's important to note as well is of the 130, we only had 6 veterans that were recognized by civil service in that last class. So I think sometimes our recruits are, the situation might be conflated because we have a larger population for our recruit class, whereas fire or other partners might have a smaller class. They have more disabled veterans and veterans. This was the last swipe of the 2015 test. It's important to note that as well. And so the numbers can flip. We in no way feel that our veterans should be displaced in any way, and we do a lot of outreach and appreciate their service. As Commissioner Finn is a Marine, and my father was a Vietnam vet for the Air Force. So we always look to outreach, and we look to partner with Army Pays and other programs that can help us to continue to get our valued applicants from the service. Some of the barriers, I think, for our department really have to do with communication and information and resources in terms of making sure that the community is aware of the process, as well as being physically fit. We lose about 20% of our applicants in the academy. So once they get into the academy, more than about 80% of those that aren't able to complete aren't able to handle the physical rigors of the academy. I'm 47. I say this all the time. I'd have no problems passing the PAT today. I'm not an athlete, an elite athlete in any stretch of the imagination, but I'd have no problems passing the PAT, which is the physical abilities test issued by the state. I'd probably last a day, maybe 2 in the academy. It's just that tough. So what we are doing is trying to develop programs with civil service and information within our department. As soon as you take the test, we want to do an information session that says, okay, you've taken the test, here's what to expect. The timeline in terms of when you can expect to be called, but get in shape and maybe have a weekly check-in with some of those folks that have taken the test. So that way they have some weekly goals and they're ready. They're not thinking that I get to the academy and I'm going to get in shape, but rather I can meet the standard of the academy on day 1. And so we're looking to
Do you have a sense, just, and I'm going to turn it over so other folks can ask questions, I can come back in the next round.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a sense of those folks who don't make it through the physical fitness piece? How many are people of color or women in terms of those numbers? And then in terms of supports outside of checking in with them and making sure they understand the rigors as you're coming in as an applicant, are there any supports offered by the department in actually helping people become more physically fit to be able to pass some of these, or are there resources for that?
We do keep a week-by-week tally. We haven't seen a disparate impact in terms of one group over another, but when you have 6 Asian Americans in the class and you lose one, that's a greater impact. So we can look at that, and I think we can look at that maybe over the next 3 to 5 years to see if there's any trends in that, so that we can speak to that. We had 27 women into the class, 19 finished, so that was a pretty good number if you're looking at comparing men to women.
Did the others not finish because of the physical piece?
I can break down that data
Okay.
with you, but 80% of those that dropped out, it was due to physical, and 20% was academic. The Academy does a great job at assessment, and they can actually tell on the first day if you're in a critical area where you're not able to handle those requirements. So I would look at maybe some other ways that we can do some screening within our own department prior to that. Again, if we could do something right after the test to say, okay, here's where you are right now. A year from now, you need to improve. Otherwise, you'd be at risk for failing out. In terms of metrics, we are looking at surveying people as they come in to sign the list in terms of how they prepared for the test, as well as their workout routines and things of that nature, things that they're doing that might help them to gain an advantage in that area.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Counselor. I think you're selling yourself short, Michael. I think you're in pretty good shape. I think you'll be all right. I have just really one quick question. It's to Michael and Juan, and it's more of your opinions and your thoughts behind this. As the police and fire in particular, and EMS as well, are recruiting, it always comes back to me like the desire in that community, whether it's the black community, the Asian community, the gay community, whatever community, the desire to want that job more than anything else. So whether it's the desire to make sure that you're physically fit so you don't wash out, the desire to stay off of drugs so you don't wash out because of the drug test, mentally that you don't break down because you've got a sergeant yelling at you. And then there's also the military aspect where I know I can name 10 families off the top of my head where their kids surpassed college or went to college and then joined the military because their desire to join the police force or join the fire department was that great. The sacrifice that they were willing to make, whether it was joining the Marines, the Army, or whatever, they had that desire where they wanted to follow dad, they wanted to follow their uncle, they wanted to follow somebody, and they put everything aside for that desire. Do you feel that there's a burning desire in your community, the communities that you're in particularly working with? Do you feel that there's a desire that we're turning people away because of just those lists, or how do we get basically what I'm saying is you're in Madison Park in English. How do you get those kids to say, you know what, this is the job I want. I want to be a firefighter more than anything else in the world. And you know what, if I have to join the Army for 3 years, I'm going to do it. I'm going to come back, I'm going to be in shape, I'm going to stay off drugs, I'm going to be focused, I'm going to be ready to go. How do we do that? Can you just kind of talk me through that?
So I feel like the desire is definitely there. When I go to the high schools, and I do have some of the kids from the Teen Academy, like last year, like a lot of the kids are really interested in the Boston Fire Department. We're restricted in how we hire, and I think the press being so public and the negative press really puts a negative spin on our recruitment process and our hiring process, where it really is like focused on military. So a lot of the kids get discouraged because what I see is just there's a lack of representation as far as veterans in the minority community. So there's not that many visuals for them in terms of veterans. So I feel like a lot of these kids don't really understand and grasp that the benefits of the military in a lot of ways. Because there's not that many visuals and there's not that many veterans who are like gung-ho that are in the fire department that are out in the community. So those are things we're trying to change and try to create a more mentor program, vets who are on the job currently to kind of show and direct some of these kids who do have that desire, like, this is the clearest path for you right here. Joining the military is the absolute definitive way of you getting a strong chance of getting on. Whereas in the civilian, because we have such a high number of veterans and disabled veterans taking the exam, it's really tough to get down to the civilian numbers where we want to be. But in order to counter that, you have to join the military. And I feel like pushing that agenda in some of these communities is the key way to kind of increase that for us. So, but the desire, like I said, to answer your question, the desire is definitely there. And I just think like the negative press and recently, just around our recruitment process, definitely disencourage, and also the fee, definitely discourages a bunch of the younger kids from getting on, like the 18, 19-year-old kids who are like really desiring to get on the
What
job.
is the fee?
It's $200. But that includes the LPAT as well. And if you sign up after the date listed on the actual flyer, it's an additional $50. We do host informational sessions. Like this past year during our recruitment process, we held several informational sessions, and we do offer waivers. The state does offer a waiver, but you have to have a specific, there's certain requirements in order to qualify. Sure. And I think it's it's a form of government assistance within a year. And not a lot, and it's very specific government assistant programs that are listed in the waiver request. So you have to fill that out prior to the deadline.
Okay. Michael, what do you think?
Well, I definitely think it's a much larger conversation as it relates to going into a community and talking about military service. In terms of, we're just a few generations away from people coming home from serving their country and, not necessarily being eligible for a GI Bill if you were a person of color. And so, if I talk to my grandfather, we can have that conversation as an Army vet. We're coming home and not having an opportunity to buy a home for his family, whereas his white counterparts would actually have that. And so when we talk about that socioeconomic impact that it can have over generations, it's difficult to go into a home and say, maybe think about joining the service. And that's just a challenge that we can find. Again, our department isn't as impacted because we have larger classes where we can have civilians that get on the job. So it's a matter of how you prepare for the test and how you rank. I will say that when I am at community career fairs or at a school, I might have a teacher escorting a student to my table. I was at Charlestown High School, and the teacher said, I'm telling this student that it's very difficult unless you go into the service. You're not going to get on to the Boston Police Department. And I had to tell them there's disabled veteran preference, there's veteran preference, there's those that have lost an immediate family member in the line of duty, but it's possible. It's just a matter of having that 3 to 5 year plan and understanding that you might not get the call the first swipe. You might get the call the second swipe or the third swipe. So it's really giving them that information. But I think within our community, there are some challenges in terms of information and how things are shared, where a kid could say, I'm interested in being a police officer, and if they have someone that's influential in their life that says, don't do it because you're wasting your time, that has a significant impact, a long-term impact on us. Now, we do have our cadet program. We did receive over 350 applications for 33 slots this most recent time frame. And again, we did a lot of outreach information sessions, and so I think people are aware. But there are some challenges. There are challenges in terms of people just taking the police exam. I'm talking to officers that have been on the job for 20 years, and they say there were 10,000 people, lines around the corner, people signed up to take the exam, and now we have maybe less than 2,000. That isn't so much of a concern for me because I'm not so much concerned with 10,000 people. I'm concerned with the 130 that were put into the recruit class. So we're still looking at quality. We're still looking at the people that have interest and desire. This is a special calling, whether you're going to be a police officer or a fireman. It's a firefighter. It's a special calling. I don't think that everyone is necessarily mentally prepared in a lot of cases, physically prepared in a lot of cases. But those that are, we want to make sure that we provide the information and the resources to put them in a place to be successful.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Councilor Ed Flynn?
Thank you, Council McCarthy. And Again, just want to say thank you to the panelists for being here. I enjoyed learning more about the issues that you're talking about. I also understand the some of the issues as it relates to veterans' preference, having served 25 years in the Navy and having served overseas as well. I had a conversation with Councilor Edwards a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about the junior ROTC program in the high schools. And I have the opportunity to visit these high schools frequently, and when I do visit them, that's where I love to visit, is talking to the young kids, and most of the young kids, the young students there are community kids from the communities of color, a lot of women. So maybe we can do more outreach into the junior ROTC program as well in the high schools. That's something I'd love to help out with and be part of that. And again, I just want to, I heard the opening comments that you made about the $500,000 that would be put in the budget mostly for training. I think that's a great step as well. Can you give us a little bit of background about more of the specifics about it?
So that was just an announcement that was actually made today, so the specifics I'm sure will follow. But we just wanted to piggyback on sort of a question asked about desire, and I just wanted to provide some context there. I don't think desire is an issue. I think the realism has set in that, you know, this is the process to get into the Boston Fire Department and or the Boston Police Department. And the kids I talk to see no need in paying a $200 fee if they have no chance of getting into the department. The other point I'll make is, you know, setting kids on the path to sort of join the military also doesn't guarantee their slots into these departments. If you look at the fact that generally in the Northeast, the applicant pools are dominated by white applicants, I don't think sending a few kids and sort of saying, you know, this is the path to get into the department guarantees that the numbers are going to move the way we want, considering the fact the way we do preferences with DAVs and sort of veterans. So I do think we need a more strategic plan to sort of get to where we get to, but I don't think this notion that, you know, sending a few kids and sort of setting them a career, setting them path to a military is all of a sudden going to give us the desired outcomes that we want.
Okay. I think it's a good step, though, the funding that you're going to include. I want to acknowledge the mayor's leadership on that. I also want to acknowledge Commissioner Fenn. He's doing a lot of, I do see him, he's doing a lot of great outreach throughout the city. He works hard, and he's determined to make sure that Boston Fire it's a great department, and it will be a more diverse department, and I'm thankful for the leadership of the fire commissioner. Just on one issue, if someone doesn't have the $200, is there any other option for that person? I mean, this city is very wealthy. We're doing a lot of economic development throughout the city. There's skyscrapers going up every day. Can we find the money for people that don't have the ability to take the test? Can we help them out somehow?
Sure. So I know
because that should not be a reason someone shouldn't get on the police or fire, certainly.
Yeah. So there are organizations like the Vulcans who work in the fire department that do sponsor some test preps for their members, and I know Mamleo does the same thing on Boston Police, and I know there's some other resources out there, but. Again, I'd point to the fact that, you know, being able to take the exam is great, but, you know, it just almost doesn't matter if you know you have no shot in getting in. And right now, if you're not a veteran, unfortunately, it's pointless to tell our kids to take these exams if we're never making it into the civilian list. So I think that's one issue.
And just one final question. I know you mentioned that when there is some communication from Human Resources, there is an email that goes out to the applicant. They may or may not get that email. Is there another system we can use to, you know, follow up with that person because I'd hate to see someone lose a job because of, miscommunication in an email. But can we have a good contact information for a potential applicant? Give them a call, visit their home. Just don't rely on an email and say, we tried. Let's try a couple different times, whether it's a knock on the door or a phone call. Give that person as much opportunity to get on the fire or get on the police. I wouldn't want to see someone not get on because of a missed email.
Yeah, and I can speak to it from my perspective working on sort of jobs. And so generally the way I do outreach is we'll use every contact information that's provided, meaning we'll use the phone number, we'll use email. And if worse comes to worse, there are a lot of relationships, folks being recommended. And so we'll reach out to a third party, maybe it's a sponsor, maybe it's a family member. And I think having those relationships are important. So we try as best as we can to make sure that, not getting that phone call or an email is a barrier. I know it does happen at times, but we try to go the extra step, whether it's reaching out to a mentor or a sponsor or someone who may know the candidate, just to make sure that the contact is being made. So that's something, and I know Mike can speak to a little bit more about BPD's process.
If there's absolutely no way to reach a person, would you notify the city council and we could also reach out to them? We're in the neighborhood every day, and I'd love to, if someone applicant was in my district, I'd love to go by and knock on their door and try to give them some good news. But I'm sure my other colleagues would do the same. But
yeah, and your colleagues, they've actually been great. I know Councilor Campbell, anytime she's recommended a candidate and we've had issues, I can just pick up the counselor and she can sort of make sure that, and we've had that working relationship with other counselors, so absolutely.
no, thank you for taking my questions.
Yes, sir. And HRD is really at the center of this in terms of the testers, the people that are taking the tests. They have their information. They don't share the information until the call for the list. But what we're looking forward to doing is, again, having an information session jointly with HRD, with Civil Service, to make sure that right after someone takes a test, we can have them come to an event, and at that point we can get several contact points for them. We can get them via email, get their telephone number, and then when the call for the list does happen, we can communicate to them as well as publicize through our various partners to say, hey, the call for the list is made. If you took the test, look to see whether or not you received that notification. If you have not, you can contact Civil Service and follow up.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Councilor Flynn. We've also been joined by Councilor at Large Ayanna Pressley. Councilor Janey.
Thank you so much. Is this on? Oh, here we go. Thank you again. And I certainly want to thank you, Chief, and Michael and Juan earlier for really clarifying, and putting out there that this is these are structural barriers that we're dealing with. And I know, you wanted to highlight the importance of hard work, and certainly hard work and really wanting this is important, but it's easy to kind of fall into this trap of if we don't have enough, it's because people don't want it. If people are homeless, it's because they don't work hard. If people are not succeeding in school, it's somehow their own fault. If people are poor. And so I think it's really important to kind of deal with the structural barrier issue and really talk about how we help people who have the desire, who are certainly want to work hard, kind of overcome that, and how we deconstruct those barriers. I'm interested in kind of getting a little more into the details around the applicant pools, whether or not we see a drop when people apply to take the exam compared to those who actually sit for the exam. What happens, what list do they get on? So you mentioned, we have the veterans preference list, there's a civilians list. I'm also interested in what is happening in terms of retention, how we're dealing with workplace environment. I know when we have incidents of just looking at the numbers. So if I'm looking at these numbers, and I thank you for putting that into the record, Council President Campbell. So if we're looking at the numbers, we see, particularly for the Hispanic community and Asian community, looking at the residents in the city of Boston, and then compared to Boston Police, Fire, and EMT, huge gaps. I mean, there are gaps all across, but I mean, like double, it's crazy. And so when you have a small number of people represented in any particular department, there's certainly the opportunity for folks to feel very isolated. There's certainly, issues around implicit and explicit bias that happens in the workplace. When we think about the women who are not being represented, and we've seen the incidents happening, play out in the globe around what's happening with the women on the fire department, and that's very difficult. So what are we doing around the retention piece and to deal with? So I want to hear the applications, the hiring, recruitment, but also the retention and the training. So any of you can respond to those, please.
So applicant pool data is something that's very important to us. So, to your point, talking about sort of the barriers to being hired, one thing we had heard early on in the diversity office is parts of the reason we're not hitting the numbers we want to see is because we don't have the applicants coming in. So we did a simple test. We said, let's go back 5 years and look at what the applicant pool actually is for every single position that's been posted in the city of Boston. And we found that on average, roughly 35% of our applicants for every single position are applicants of color, which dispels the notion that we don't have the applicants applying. For HRD, it's a little bit different. We have requested the applicant pool data.
I'm sorry, you said 35% of color?
Yeah, of color, on average for every position that's posted in the city. HRD is a little different. We've requested the applicant pool information. It's been a little bit difficult to get. Maybe Mike or Juan can speak a little bit more to that. But I don't believe they actually collect information on race to be able to say, X percentage of people are persons of color taking the exam or not. So it's difficult to do that analysis. But we do know that, applicant pools in the Northeast are predominantly white. To what extent, we're not sure because we don't have that information. So maybe Mike or...
Yeah. So essentially, they do oftentimes have some anecdotal information for us, but again, we look forward to partnering with HRD on getting the information prior. What we can do as a department is to make sure that we're gathering data of the people that are coming to sign the list, and that's at that point we're able to get information in terms of who they're identifying and language and things of that nature. But the partnership with HRD needs to be strengthened definitely to be able to provide that kind of data. The number of test takers, they give us that information, and oftentimes it's a matter of what the applicant is inputting into the HRD system. So there's a couple of a gap. Yes, yeah. Absolutely. It'll turn on.
I do have our numbers. HRD provided our numbers on the applicant pools for the last 3 exams. I could do it offline.
And what are we saying? Are the numbers going up? Are they going down? Are they staying flat?
You'll see overall that the numbers are coming down. So in the city of Boston, for Boston eligible, in 2012, there was 967 applicants. Of the entire applicant pool was 967. In 2014, that number dropped to 736. And in 16, it dropped to 641.
And do you have the breakdown?
I do have the
by race,
breakdown.
if you could.
So in 12, those identified as Asian Pacific Islander, female 1, male 17. Black or African American, 227, female 20, male 205, non-specified 2. Choose to not identify, 84, 3 female, 58 males, 23 not specified.
So if we're looking at 2012 compared to 2016, do we see, if we just look at black applicants as an example, are we seeing the numbers going up or going down?
They're going down. They're going down from overall male and female on the 2012 black, those identified as black or African American were 227. And for the 16 test, it was 117.
And for Latinx?
And that was, in 2012, it was 111. And in 16, 77.
And so what are we saying about this? What are the lessons? What are we doing different so that we can bring those numbers back up? What's your takeaway from this?
My takeaway is I think we need more community involvement. We need to be out there. and I think the important piece, I think, has been talked about on by a number of different panelists, is the education of those communities that are underrepresented, that they understand the pathway to these jobs, or to increase your opportunity, is by veterans preference. I think that's the message that, look at, lack of some legislative change to the veterans preference law at the State House, that is your pathway.
How many veterans are local residents of Boston for the last 5 years versus are coming from outside of the city
All right,
or
so
outside of the state?
I couldn't tell you that direct, but Counsel, I'll give you how.
Do we have a report on that in the city, Chief?
I'll walk you through the process if I can, okay? So the requirements for the civil service exam for firefighter is you have to live 1 year prior to the day of the exam within the city of Boston to have residence preference.
And is that through the city or through state?
State. Okay. Returning veterans, if they enlisted in the state of Massachusetts and discharged to the state of Massachusetts, have 90 days to establish preference, residence, I should say, in the municipality they're seeking employment. That's state law. That's civil service. So I know there's a notion out there that there's a lot of people from different areas of the country coming to Boston to, if you will, be employed as firefighters. I'll speak for the fire department. I won't speak for the police. If they fall within state law, I think they're applicants. But, you know, the 90-day piece, I find, you know, there's been a lot of misrepresentation around that people are discharging who enlisted in Alabama, say, and came to Boston and got a job. They had to have enlisted in the state of Massachusetts to receive that preference. And they have 90 days to establish that residency. So those applicants have followed the rules. And those are the rules of civil service, and those are state law. So I think the quarrel lies, if you're looking to change the preference, and I think there's a piece of legislation around the 3-year piece that's residing up the State House now on residency, I think that's something that should be pursued. But I caution you on that, too, because I think it cuts both ways. I think it cuts both ways, the fact that you could end up eliminating the returning minority veterans if they say they reside in Brockton or from another part of the state from being, if you will, eliminated from the selection into a potential in Boston. And I do not have those numbers as far as I don't have those numbers, but we'll look, I'll see if we can extract those numbers for you.
No, that would be really helpful. I can come back in the second round. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Cheney. Councilor Edwards?
Thank you. Yes, just to echo what my colleague Ed Flynn said, we had talked about junior ROTC as a pipeline. My mother is a veteran, and she's African American, in case you didn't know. No, it happens. But just want to make sure. So knowing, I come from that background. I come from growing up on military bases that are extremely diverse. And so, you know, I sit here and hearing about the veterans' preference as an impediment to diversity, and certainly I am torn. And I'm you know, that really concerns me because my mother would have been one of those folks, provided she was interested or recruited or talked to about being a firefighter, that may have happily have taken that opportunity. She was not. Now, and that's where we retired over in Michigan, but that led me to an immediate question. You know, that would have helped us a great deal financially if my mother had even been talked to about working in these kinds of fields. No one did. No one reached out to her. We certainly struggled. I was on free lunch, even though she was a veteran. And man, when I look at the benefits, well earned and hard fought for, I'm not questioning them at all. I think, well, where are you when there are women, when there are people of color about to retire and getting out of the military? What are your recruitment services there?
From Boston Police's standpoint, again, working with the recruiter, so when they're going into the military, to be able to have a conversation with them and to say, if once you're interested in coming back to Massachusetts, again, we're not getting veterans from Oklahoma coming and taking people's jobs. But if you're from Massachusetts, we go to those points of entry where they're going into the service and talking to them about the opportunity, doing information sessions for the recruiters as well. So again, take care of your military service. When you come back, here's a number that you can call to make sure that you can take a makeup exam and do outreach that way. Army Pays is one of the better programs right now where they work with a number of corporations as well as agencies to make sure that their recruits are able to get interviews, things of that nature. We're looking to partner with them to make sure that they get the resources and information saying this is what veterans preference is, this is how you can take a makeup exam, work with HRD again in that outreach. So we look at this as a full court press.
Okay.
Again, the only 1 in 10 veterans from Massachusetts are people of color. We can talk to that one, but we're also going to talk to those other 9 that are well qualified, great leadership, and I think people kind of sell short the diversity and inclusion that happens within our service now in terms of the exposure that you get to various cultures, as well as celebrating and working with the men and women that are within your unit. So those are the types of things that we look for in just officers, and so we're going to continue to do that type of outreach as well. And we do work with junior ROTC programs within the city, especially as it relates to our cadet program. And again, as I mentioned, we work with English High and Madison Park, Charlestown, any high school that has any type of leadership program, and we look to plant seeds and let them know that these types of opportunities are available to them.
Okay. That's it. Either.
Okay. So just to touch on the ROTC element that you had brought up, and we definitely have had personnel in there previous. We're actually going to be revamping, you weren't here earlier, but I was talking about revamping our Explorers program. And part of that is kind of re-strategizing and going out into the ROTCs at Madison and English High and working with those. We had a previous program where we did work with those JROTC programs. And under, the new position as myself as a diversity officer, I kind of wanted to revamp it and make sure that it was, there was something there that we could actually use and move forward and give them the proper information that they need. That PACE program, I introduced Michael to it over at the Boston Police. We've had the program for, I want to say, a couple of years now. It's definitely a beneficial program. It locates Boston-specific veterans returning home. They identify their phone numbers and their emails. You can talk with transition counselors directly at all these military installations, and it breaks it down month by month of what veterans are coming home in what year. So you can specify April 2018, we have 34 returning vets from Boston.
This is just for the Army, right?
And this is just for the Army.
Okay.
So that's been, we utilize that as a recruitment tool this past recruitment effort back from November to November to February. And we had some success. Some of the information is outdated, but again, that goes with working with transition counselors, revamping that program, and working with police, and hopefully collectively we can come up with something together and increasing and making it more of a solid recruitment tool for us. And then, I think that was it, right? I think it was the recruitment plan for the pays and.
From veteran perspective, yeah.
Oh, we're also we work closely with Giselle Sterling from the Office of Veteran Services of returning vets. So we work very close with her. We're associated with multiple job fairs with her and recruit military and those military job fairs as well.
Councilor, just to add to what Juan mentioned, was elaborating on is, I just mentioned that it cuts both ways, that 3-year piece. So if you have discharging veterans from any branch of service that of color or females discharging, if the 3-year piece goes in, when it cuts that way, they'd have to reside 3 years prior. So if I believe you mentioned discharging from the Army, or in particular, some remote location other than Massachusetts, or being a veteran from the state of Massachusetts. Say you're a veteran from Michigan, and you thought Boston Fire would be a great opportunity for you, and you're a person of color. That 3-year rule will cut you Currently, it's with the one-year piece. If it goes to 3, you'll eliminate that candidate, and you're basically just wasting your time.
Yeah.
Because most people are not going to make an investment for 3 years, and then with the potential, no guarantee.
Right, right. No, well, I appreciate that perspective in terms of how any kind of limitation on veterans' preference is going to be limiting the very few, the 1 in 10 veterans that are people of color as well. But the other question, I guess, is part of, you had mentioned, or my colleague, Councilor McCarthy had mentioned desire. And so I'm curious, so when you do have recruits who are the veterans or who have made it through, who are part of your each individual agencies, they're women, they're people of color, retention, they've demonstrated their desire. Matter of fact, they demonstrated their qualifications. They are there working and serving the people of Boston right now, trying to save their lives. So tell me about what you're doing to retain them and keep them there and keeping them safe.
Our average age or time frame for our officers are about 25 years. So you get the job, you keep the job, and you love the job. So we are looking at programming. We're excited about the programming that the mayor just announced today with regard to diversity and training. We already have bias-free training in the academy and in-service training for those officers that have graduated decades ago that can now go online and get that training. So we do a lot of bias-free training and cultural awareness within the academy. Our superintendent, Lisa Holmes, just retired, and she brought in a number of community organizations to the academy as part of the training to have some inclusivity there as well. But I think our retention, for the most part, is very good in that, again, people that wish to serve in this way continue to learn and continue to grow. One thing that we're trying to do is to make sure that the promotional exams are available to them on a pretty regular basis. We just finished our detectives exam in June, and we had a good turnout. We had a total of 652 applicants signing up for the detectives exam. You had to have a minimum of 3 years as an officer in order to be eligible for the detectives exam. We had about 3% Asian turnout, 23% African American, 10% Latino, and 64% white, and 223 women sat for that particular exam. So we look forward to being able to draw from that list to be rated as detectives as well over the next couple of years.
Anyone else want to speak to retention?
Our retention, I don't think we really have a problem with the retention as far as keeping people on. We have a pretty solid track record of people, once they stay on, it's a pretty desirable job. People don't want to just leave. So we really don't have a problem with retention.
I don't think anybody wants to just leave. Sometimes a person may feel forced out, or that they can't take what they're dealing with the microaggressions or lack of safety. So I want to be very clear about that. I'm not talking about people just leaving.
Yep, under my knowledge, nobody's left because they felt pressured or anything like that. So no.
Okay.
Our retention is good so far.
So your retention?
Under my knowledge, yes.
Okay, all right. And then I think, so again, on the topic of desire, I guess I'm not really, or you can speak to your own desires, I suppose, about leadership and pushing and moving something at the state level to do something about this. If you all came and testified and said diversity is a priority and this is something that you want to see happen, and then say at the same time, well, but then there's that list, so oh well, and there's nothing we can do about it. Tell me about your own desires. What would you like to see the state veteran preference look like that balances, because as you know, I'm a daughter of a veteran, and she certainly was able to work at the VA and other institutions when we did get work. But how would you design the veterans preference to balance both veterans coming home, but also our desire to have Bostonian agencies, safety agencies, look like Boston?
So
what would you
I'm
suggest?
I'm a veteran myself, and I also grew up in the city as well. So I see it from both ends, and I'm also a minority, so I see it from all different angles. you know, veterans deserve an opportunity to get onto these jobs firsthand. I think with the veterans preference, it allows them to get those jobs that are desirable because they do serve their country. They do make that effort. They do sign the list, and they do put their lives on the line. But again, I'd love to see city residents on there as well. You know, you just have to find a balance, and I think that comes with working with the veteran groups and getting those groups together in the same room and figuring out a way that we can make all parties happy. So I've had these conversations with Representative Holmes. I've gone up there and spoken to State Senator Nick Collins on several occasions based around the legislation on these specific issues. And the problem is to get everybody on the same page to go against veterans is just not realistic. A lot of these people just either they don't want to go against the vets or they just have a problem moving forward. So it never, Russell Holmes, for instance, came up with a piece of legislation. I think it was to change, I think, either the preference on the police. I forget exactly what it was, but that never even made it to the House floor, I don't think. And if it did, I think it got voted down pretty swiftly. And that was to help and benefit some of these public agencies in the city. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. You could probably look at it and maybe
I'm sure,
pick apart that. Yeah,
I'm sure Representative Holmes may have his own opinion about it, and I try not to discuss a person's efforts or conversations about what happened in the other house. The question I had was, what would you do differently? If it's nothing, then that's fine.
Yep.
But right now, according to the National Pew Center, research, I think of veterans in 2016, 77% are white, 7% Latino, 12% Black, and 2% women. So this preference is going to be continuing, if not actually making us less diverse, because those numbers are less than what we have right now. So the question is, how do you balance both? I mentioned before, again, and I don't want this to be interpreted as coming out against the vets. I think you said that. And I'm not. I'm asking from your creativity, from your experience, and actually from your leadership, and please demonstrate some desire. What would you do differently in the state legislation to help us reflect Boston?
Sure. I'll take a crack at that, Councilor. I think the conversation, unfortunately, has been pitted veterans against diversity, and I think that's the wrong way to look at this conversation. I think it's a question about equity and fairness, and I think, whether you're a white kid from Southie or a Black kid from Roxbury right now, your chances of getting to the departments are the same. So I think there's a question around equity.
If you're not a veteran.
If you're not a veteran. So I think the question shouldn't be around veterans, or I think we all support our veterans and we hold them to the highest esteem and sort of honor. There are examples out there of cities who are doing both. For example, our state police assigns 2 points to our veterans. That's not absolute preference. So I do think there are systems and examples out there where you can have veteran preference and sort of give preference to veterans, but also think about sort of diversity and inclusion. So I think there are examples out there of how to do this.
I think from the Boston Police standpoint, we've seen some success again with the language preference that we're getting through again partnerships with the various agencies in the city to get the appropriate data. At the end of the day, we want to serve the population, and we want to be a reflection of that. So being able to give the right information and utilize those resources. I'll also say the cadet program. Now, the cadet program is a civilian position. We have a lot more control over the applicants. Right. We still interview, we still make it across the board, but we definitely address the socioeconomic issues. Again, that poor white kid from South Boston should have the same opportunity as the kid from Mattapan.
Agreed.
So for our cadet program, we try to get that balance, and we feel that we're working to that end. The commissioner, again, has the ability to put cadets into an immediate class, provided they pass civil service, so they get their own kind of preference. Drawing from the various baskets, I think, gives us some kind of balance and doesn't necessarily displace any veterans or have issues with the veterans' preference. I want to emphasize we have larger classes than that of our brothers with the fire department. So we have a little bit more flexibility in that area, but if we had, say, 40 people coming in, we would probably be impacted by that veteran preference as well.
Suggestion?
Council, I'd like to add a little to this conversation. There's a couple things. First off, there's a number of federal laws that will come into play. Okay, USERRA is one law that protects veterans' rights in employment and reemployment. You have the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, the AVs would fall under. You have veterans are now a protected class in Massachusetts. Governor Baker signed that in 2016. They just strengthened it with the BRAVE Act, which was, I believe it's not passed yet, but I believe it's ready for signature. There's a lot there that needs to be discussed other than just desire. There's a lot of legal challenges, in my opinion, that are going to be brought forward with anything that looks like it is being diluting or disadvantaging or discriminating against veterans. That's not Joe Finn's opinion. That's the opinion of a lot of people who are looking at the topic. So I just think that discussion has to be on the table. People need to know that those are some significant hurdles that people have to understand and embrace, that understand that this could be what could potentially come of this. So that's, I just thought that people need to understand those different areas around the topic.
So, yes, but I think my question was not about the hurdles. I don't think I'm confused that there are issues I asked about within your mind and your thoughts about looking at the state veteran preferences. Is there a balance, and what balance would you like to see in the law? Now, leave all of the legal issues aside. There's not one where we're not doing anything. I'm just wanting to see that leadership and desire in you, and to tell me, looking at the law and veteran preferences, if there is no desire to move or change it, that's fine. I can accept that. But I want to know, looking at this law, one suggestion was maybe having a point system. Two would be, does the list really have to be as firm as it is? I mean, I'm wondering, in your own mind and creativity, leave the legalese aside, what's there?
Well, listen, I think the system is fair as far as veterans, okay? When you ask me my opinion, I want to be very careful how I answer that question around a couple of reasons. Because under MCAD, I could be personally liable if I'm viewed as, if you will, purporting a position that would discriminate against another class. In veterans, a protected class. That happened in 2016. So I think we certainly want to be that diverse department and representative of the communities we serve. It's how do we strike that balance?
I know,
I think there's a number of initiatives, and I believe the point of these hearings are to get everybody at the table and discuss how best we do that. And there's short-term goals and there's long-term goals. I think that the long-term goals we got to be thinking about is 3 to 5 year window. That's the reality. I don't think it's, does anybody any good to sit here and speculate on what could possibly or not be possibly done in the next 1 year, 12 months, 18 months. I think people are going to understand this is a long-term strategy is what we need to be working on.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
So, I think Trim was going to say something.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was briefly going to answer your question about what would I would like to do to see a balance of veterans and people of color and women. And this doesn't have anything to do with state law per se, my comment, but one of the things that we find could be useful is, for example, earlier someone here said, some people just don't have $200 to pay for that fee, or $750 to pay for the apprenticeship going into the EMT route, or transportation. And so we would like to fill that gap, such as, for example, for a single mom who's a person of color, who is a veteran, and who is eligible for these pathways. If they needed those minor services or major supportive services, that I would like to see that ecosystem work together and aligned to fill those gaps so that we can increase veterans, people of color, and women equally into these pipelines.
I'm just going to quickly take this over, and Councilor Edwards, thank you. we're going to keep going through some rounds because two things. One, I want to give, obviously, Councilor Presley an opportunity to speak. We also have Sophia from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and I know she has to leave at a certain time. We also want to give her an opportunity to speak before noon. But I'll quickly add, I think, what I think is abundantly clear from this conversation thus far is that we need a strategic plan that includes both short-term and long-term goals to change these numbers. While I hear you, Commissioner, we've talked about this offline as well. There are many protected categories protected by numerous laws: blacks, veterans, people of color, those who are disabled. One thing we have the power to do at this level is to change laws and then to advocate for the state to do the same. And we can change the laws. That's the only way we're going to be able to create this balance in civil service. I think one of the examples that was mentioned earlier about state police. I have state police that live in my district. This conversation around diversity within the city's public safety agencies has prompted them to want to talk to me about the state. You have the 2-point system there, but they're having their own struggles with diversity. One question I have before turning over to Councilor Presley and then Sophia is, has the city of Boston ever studied, and this came up from someone who's here, studied the civil service? I mean, we're talking about it as possible barriers, but actually studied it in an objective, meaningful way, looked at the applicant pools, looked at those numbers and said, what happened to the 77 Latino folks that were on the HRD list, the 117 black folks, were some of those veterans? If they weren't, if they were, what happened there? But has the city of Boston ever studied the civil service, the benefits the city gets, and then what we don't get out of it? Because I think that is a meaningful step that we should take, because we're talking about it, everyone has their different perspectives. So I want to leave you with that question, sure, Chief, and then Councilor Presley.
So not to the comprehensive way you've just described. I think, so for example, when our office has reached out to HRD, for example, just getting access to the data has been difficult. So I think that's something we can do. It's going to take some collaboration. I think we can work with BFD and BPD more to sort of share data and analyze data and sort of look at sort of where some of the shortfalls are. But to your question, no, I don't believe we've done that to the extent we need to or in a comprehensive manner.
Councilor Presley?
Thank you. So first, I just want to commend the makers, thank Councilor Campbell and McCarthy for spearheading this important conversation, and I thank you for your testimony thus far, which has been very informative, and I thank my colleagues for their robust line of questioning. And just picking up on the point offered by Councilor Campbell relative to, picking up on the point offered by, did you guys hear all the thank yous? Okay. All right. So picking up, and thank you for what you do every day. But picking up on the point initiated by Councilor Campbell relative to data, I do think that's so critical. I don't have a sense of if we're keeping a master of lists so one person comes to mind in particular, a constituent who shaved their beard, cut off their locks, broke a record for the physical test, and then on the written test had a 98. And they never even got a call. And so, this, as much as this is about protocols and practices, it's also about culture and engagement. And so, I want that data, and I want us keeping track of that because, someone should have reached back out to that person, reapply, or consider being a veteran, or something. But based on their one experience, and I don't believe that they're an anomaly, I think that's a systemic issue. The other thing that I wanted to say is, it's just my fundamental belief that, and I know many of my colleagues share this, that the solutions rest with those who have walked this walk. And so I just wonder how often you are conferring with and actively listening to and integrating the recommendations of MAMLIO or the Vulcans or any of the advocacy organizations or internal organizations that support these communities that are in the minority within both forces. So could you speak to that? What's your partnership? What collaborative efforts, what strategies, sure, and recommendations have come out of MAMLIO and the Vulcans, and have any of those things been implemented?
So I would say the encouraging thing going forward is, I think, to your point, we have sort of cultivated some of these relationships. I know we had sat down with Commissioner the Vulcans and myself. I believe Sophia Hall was in that meeting as well. And part of the recommendations, and we've adopted some of those, was having a language preference. So I know in the last class, that was a recommendation from the Vulcans. We got 12 Spanish speaking, and I believe 3 Haitian Creole preferences. So that's going to diversify this next class a little bit. That was a direct conversation and recommendation from the Vulcans. One other recommendation of theirs was moving from the 1 to 3 year residency requirement, which I think is another move the commissioner is looking to make. So we have begun to take some of those recommendations.
And was that a formal, I'm sorry to interrupt, Chief, was that a formal report? Is there a formal document that came out of these discussions in terms of their recommendations? So you named 2, but I can't contextualize it. Were there 10 recommendations? Did those recommendations come out of a series of meetings over what period of time? Yeah, so those were from ongoing conversations, and those conversations continue. So I'm speaking to Mamleo and the Vulcans almost weekly. So they weren't put forth as sort of a set of recommendations per se, but those recommendations were communicated to myself, Juan, the commissioner, and I believe of those 5 recommendations, 3 have been implemented already. And so they're small steps, but they're good steps. I think having folks at the table, hearing their concerns is important, and making them feel as a part of the process, which I think folks haven't felt in the past, right? So I think those are positive steps going forward. But still, it's how do we do more? A lot of these things are Band-Aids, right? The cadet program, the language preference, it doesn't address the overarching issues, which the commissioner pointed, a lot of it is sort of we feeling like our hands are tied, right? So let me ask this: Are these limitations, these sort of legal statutes, if you will, that have created some inherent challenges over time that lead us to where we are today, that get in the way, perhaps, of desire and will and the opportunity to really lead on this in the way that we would like? We can't be the only municipality that's in the same crosshairs legally. And yet there are municipalities who are besting us in this space. And so I'm just curious, from the space of research, have we looked at best practices in other cities? Have we figured out why Chicago is doing such an excellent job on this front, or why Philadelphia is doing such an excellent job on this front? I mean, what's the closest apples to apples comparison in terms of demographics and population and the same statutes that we could look to? So my office does do that. Matter of fact, we have our intern here whose sole focus is looking at comparative cities across the country to figure out what they're doing. So, for example, Chicago has a program where 50% of the pool of the applicants are reserved for veterans. I believe 25% are reserved for the public school system graduates. So there are examples out there. Some cities have opted out of civil service completely. So different cities have handled it differently. I think Boston's a little unique in that some of the challenges that we face. But this is a strong mayor form of government, so we do have some autonomy. And this sounds like some best practices and low-hanging fruit that we would not have to go through too many, maneuverings to just do. Absolutely, I agree, Councilor. I think we should be doing more in this space. Just 2 other quick follow-up points. So thank you for that, and appreciate having those best practice examples on the record, and we'll certainly circle back on those things. My other question is, I do think a lot of this, Councilor Edwards was raising the point about maybe people leave because they feel they feel uncomfortable or marginalized, or whatever. Those things are often harder to quantify. It's just like public safety work. We count the casualties, but you can't speak to the lives you've saved always. You can't, or that you've changed or influenced, right? And so I think the same is true on the flip side in terms of when people feel marginalized or unsafe, or that an environment is hostile. Perhaps that information is not always going to be captured. But my point is, we can pursue these best practices, but it still is going to come back to climate. I think I was talking about negative press stories, but those, take these things, but, you know, a lot of those press stories are born out of, you know, real experiences for people. And so we can change all the policies and the practices, but if people, you know, still question whether or not this is a climate where they will be welcome and where they will be received, then it's really all in vain. And so I just, you know, just was looking for some acknowledgement that there are challenges within the climate, and there's work that we need to do to be more than just tolerant, because nobody wants to be tolerated. They want to be welcomed. They want to feel included. And that doesn't just happen organically. Those are things we have to be very intentional about fostering and about doing. So, you know, I want us to continue to explore, you know, legal avenues and all these things, but could you just speak to culture and climate and what can we do to address that? Because that's our best calling card. That's our best advertisement.
Well, that definitely an ongoing conversation. One of the first conversations that I had when I came on to the department in February was with our president of Mamleo, and Larry has been phenomenal at sharing his experience as an African-American officer. I get an opportunity to talk to women that have been on the job and talk about their experience, how we can improve upon their experience. I think we could probably do a better job at profiling officers and telling their story about how they got to where they are. So we'll be working with our graphics team and a YouTube channel. I think that would be helpful to not only show the public, but just internally the struggles that someone might kind of come up against. Again, I'll use Superintendent Holmes, Lisa Holmes, who's just retired, came from Academy Homes, which is a project in Boston, and to the helm of the academy as a superintendent. That's a tremendous story, and I think something that we could share with the public to make sure that they're aware, but also to kind of dig into some of those issues that she might have as an African-American woman in a predominantly white department, and what that meant in terms of going up the ranks and some of the challenges. I think, again, I think we look forward to some of the training that's going to come from the mayor's announcement for the diversity and inclusion training that I think our civilian personnel and officers would benefit from.
Okay, and then the last thing I would just say is that, you know, we care about this not simply from a place of fairness and representation. This is also about two things. And I'd be interested in the projections. How many firefighters and police officers are up for retirement? You know, this is an issue. The trades are dealing with this. We have a number of forces that are aging out. So, you know, yes, it's frustrating that they're not representative of the diversity of the city, but it's also that folks are aging out. We need to be onboarding people. And then if we are really serious about addressing economic inequality, the wealth and wage gap, these are good jobs. And I want as many Bostonians as possible to have access to these jobs. So in order to address those larger goals, to onboard as we are losing, and also to address economic inequality, the wealth and wage gap, what are your projections? Because that's the other reason why we have to accelerate what we're doing here. Can you give a sense of how many people are eligible for retirement?
So on average, and certainly we're coming into a peak period of time, Councilor, because of the hiring that went on, say, post-Vietnam. So a lot of those gentlemen are trading out of the department, certainly with numerous years of service. We're probably averaging and trading probably 60 firefighters a year at this point. And that fluctuates, you know, it's usually like 50 to between 60. I think the next 2 years, I think we're going to see in the neighborhood of 60 to 65. And that is based strictly, well, I shouldn't say strictly.
I'm sorry, in total for 2 years or each year?
Each year.
Okay.
Each year, we're going to probably attrit 60 to 65. And of that 60, 65, there's probably 35 mandatory retirement, 65. And then we have disability retirements and our cancer cases and our cardiac cases and things like that. So on average, it's hard to, if you looked at it raw numbers just on age, you can come to a number, but I think that's not truly transparent because we do have the disability side, which is significant, that we have members retiring early with.
So Commissioner, on the police side, we know that impact, that we already don't have enough officers. We know what that impact is in terms of community policing, both in numbers and in lack of diversity. So what's that impact for you?
Well, I have to say that the mayor has been really great as far as recognizing that. And in these past budgets, we've typically we hired, usually a typical size class for us was 50, and we've had classes of 60 going forward. And we had a class that's getting ready to graduate actually in a couple of weeks is a class of 60, and we're going to be processing another class of 60. And in that class of 60 that we're going to graduate, we did use the language preference cert, Par 8, and we were able to attract 11 candidates through language. And we filed for this next class, we're going to be looking to attract 15 to 20, and we're actually going to be adding a female component to it to see if we can, which is difficult. Listen, if Joe Finn, the fire commissioner, wanted to hire 5 female firefighters off that list, I need to get the approval of HRD. Okay, I got to show the need of why they bring a certain skill set, a specific job-related tasks to the table that is not provided by anybody else on the list. So
I'd say we're stronger. So you need us for that.
I have a challenge for you.
We give birth to humanity. We're stronger. So there's an argument right there.
Listen, I'm a married man of 34 years. I'm not going to argue. All right. But you know, we just filed, if you will, with civil service yesterday on which was mentioned today. The Asian community and population of the department's certainly lacking. So we went through and looked at the eligible list as far as the Asian population in the city, and we filed Par 8 to hire 3 Chinese Cantonese speakers and 2 Vietnamese speakers. They were the ones who resided on the list. So we're going to go to try to capture.
And thank you, because I think very often, and I appreciate Councilor Campbell's line of questioning earlier, when we talk about diversity, people can just define it by race, not consider gender. And even when they're talking about race, often just only talk about Latinos and African Americans. So I do appreciate, that focus on the underrepresentation of Asians as well. Saw up close and personal in Charlestown how lives were saved 3 years ago because you had Cantonese-speaking firefighters. So it does make a difference. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And then before they turn over, so could you just talk to me about projections in terms of retirement and what that impact is on policing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, our numbers are going to fluctuate between 80 and 90 for the next 3 to 5 years. The mayor's been great at giving us a budget of 130 for the class of 2017 candidates. We've been given another 130. I'd like to go on record to say if we had a larger academy that was not on in Hyde Park, like a West Roxbury High School that might be closing, that would be phenomenal. And I think we'd even be able to share resources with the fire and other agencies that would need that type of training. It's a great facility. We would probably be able to have even larger classes, provided the budget could match that. But our attrition is going to be directly related to classes that are up for retirement. We had some larger classes in the late 80s, early 90s, so they're coming up on their retirement time frame, and we would anticipate in the next 3 to 5 years classes of 130 each year.
Thank you. Thank you very much for indulgence.
Thanks. I think you just checked the box. I think Chief Gross now owes you lunch. So that was, well, I like the way you put that right in there. We're just going to go quickly to some public testimony to respect the people's time. 2 people have signed up to speak, Sophia Hall and Michael Duran or Devon. So if you'd like to come to either one, we'll activate those microphones. If you just, your name and affiliation for the record.
Certainly. Good afternoon now, Madam President, Mr. Chief, councilors. For those of you that I have not yet had the privilege to collaborate with, there we go. My name is Sophia Hall. I'm an attorney with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice. For those of you who are not familiar, we are a 50-year-old nonprofit, nonpartisan legal organization. We provide pro bono free legal advocacy and representation to community members who experience discrimination and racial injustice due to their race and national origin. I want to say that in terms of contextualizing my comments today, these comments directly come from my organizational clients, the Boston Society of Vulcans and MAMLEO, and the hundreds of community members that I get to talk to per year who have opinions and experiences that go to the heart of this issue. You know, I really enjoyed today listening to this conversation because even though this is a conversation that I have been engaging with and others from the Lawyers Committee for years, with a lot of the people present here today, to be frank, this was one of the most helpful conversations I've heard. Part of it is because we're getting updated information about initiatives that don't come to me despite my requests. Part of it is because it finally feels as though it's time to make movement. You know, I don't intend to play Debbie Downer, but the reality is this is not a new problem. And what I really appreciate about the way we have framed the conversation today is that it's not just a problem in terms of recruitment, and it's not just a problem in terms of retention, it's a really severe problem in terms of promotion. I wanted to share a little bit about some of the low-hanging fruit or the solutions that we have offered over the last several years to give some context to some of the conversations that the Lawyers Committee has been having with partners here today and others that are not present. And then I wanted to share a few comments from a community forum that we engaged in last June that had more than 100 people present. And again, some of the people from the panel were present for that. In terms of some of the initiatives that we have requested in the past, the one thing I want to say to the council is that nobody's hands are tied. These are not impossibilities. What they require is a dedication and the time and the resources to take on this issue. What I can tell you is that what I see from other communities throughout Massachusetts is that their leadership from the top engages day to day in these initiatives. So for example, when talking about language certification, while I recognize there has been some progress, more can be made. Those requests can be for higher numbers for more languages. There can be structural changes internally to ensure that you can create data that can ensure that HRD does approve those requests. It can be a priority that the mayor signs off on, which they do in other cities, but I don't see here. It can be a priority that the chiefs introduce to HRD, not necessarily people lower in the hierarchy. One of my personal agendas has been stop bypassing candidates who are qualified, who are of color, who have taken the time and the energy and the money to take this test 3 and 4 times, and then get bypassed on a really arbitrary basis. Again, not only do I talk to hundreds of people a year about this issue, lots of those people are Black veterans. They're people who have taken this test 2 and 3 times. They are Marines like yourself that have never gotten a call. You know, I recognize that there are issues, but as a lawyer, I also believe that there are always solutions, even if they require us to be litigious. Sometimes that's what it takes. But I will certainly request that as you guys think about how you engage in these conversations, use your weight on Beacon Hill, because we haven't seen enough weight thrown around yet at the State House. There are initiatives that we have seen in other spaces where the mayor and other high-ranking officials get involved and they see change. We need that to be done for diversity. We need to see the commitment that we see in other areas to people of color and to women. And the reality is we do not see that. And then you talked a little bit about your engagement with the community. I have to say, Councilor Campbell, you hit the nail on the head when you started talking about my partners, the Vulcans and Mamleo. Excuse me, Presley. These are not just groups who are here to have conversations with or grab coffee with and talk about what do they see and what can they do. These are people that ought to have a meaningful seat at the table. They should be given part of your budget and part of your resources to help you recruit. They should be people that sit at the round table to help make decisions about who you hire. They should be part of those interview panels who decide who you promote. That's meaningful access. That is not something that they currently have. Those are organizations who come directly from the community, who speak to, whose offices are in the community. That's your direct gate. There is no money required to make them a more meaningful player in these decisions. In fact, all of the things that I've just talked about require little to no money whatsoever. And they're the things that even if they're Band-Aids over bigger problems, doing them meaningfully can make real change. I mentioned to you that we held a forum June of last year. We held it at Mamlio's office on Columbia Ave. We partnered with the Vulcans, with Mamlio, and with the Boston office of the NAACP. More than 100 people turned out. So when you start asking questions about desire in the community, people want this. People want these jobs. People want this security. People want to be able to have children who can be proud of them because of who they serve, because of the position they hold in Boston. But instead, what they feel, and I will say this on their behalf because those people aren't here today because they're at jobs, so they can't offer this themselves, is that the failure to diversify these really important departments to them sends the message that they are not an important part or a meaningful part of this community. It sends the message that their dignity is not respected. It sends the message that the concerns in their community where people of white descent don't live are not important. It's not just about ensuring that we are PC, that we're keeping up with the times of diversity, that we're ensuring that we have the employment value of diversity, but it's about meaningfully understanding what this community looks like and who ought to be a part of it. So what I'll say and what I'll end with is what I end all of my letters, my very annoying letters to all of the departments here, is that I and the Lawyers Committee continue to stand committed to these issues. We commit to being a mouthpiece for the people who can't be here. And I commit to being a partner in some of this low-hanging fruit. Because again, some things are litigious, but not everything is. And if you called me or you sent me information about a language certificate as I asked, I would write a letter to HRD and push for that. If you talked about creating surveys or things to get the data you need to get those initiatives moving forward, I would rally community members to create focus groups to get you that data. I think that the Vulcans and Mamlio would be very happy to do those things for you, but we don't get asked. So as you continue these conversations, we hope that we're a meaningful partner here. But what I want you to know again is that this isn't new, and what we really hope is that this is not a one-off thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Devon?
Thank you, Sophia.
Thanks for having me here today. A little tall for the microphone. And then also I'd request that in the future budget, if we can just have better seats for the audience. Just kidding. Councilor Janey, the data that you requested on the applicant pools from prior years, I have that. When I was last time in the chambers, I had announced those statistics, but I'll follow up with an email to all the councilors and provide that. And if you can you please just share it with the commissioners of each department? So moving forward, I know that this is a three-part series. Madam President, thanks for keeping me updated on that. I think for diversity, we should also start asking our diversity officers, what are the numbers of LGBTQ within their departments? What are the veterans? What are the religious breakdowns? And what are the persons with disability for their statistics? As this being Pride Month, obviously it's something that we take seriously in the city. First city in the United States to adopt gay marriage, and we should be proud of that. So let's keep pushing diversity across all numbers. And then I'd also ask, what are the language numbers? Those are common themes that we've seen throughout. The issue as it's stated today is that the safety of our communities is not being represented by the people of the community. I'm of the belief a Bostonian is a Bostonian, no matter who they identify as. However, I certainly understand where somebody would disagree and why they would. So what solutions do we have? Continued public discourse like this is great. It's a great step in achieving solutions. Public discourse on key issues of bedrock of this country. We should be proud of that, and we should always keep pushing for it. But discourse is the way to understand the problem and hypothesize the solution. Race and gender disparity are issues presented today, and they exist. It is my belief long-term solutions will require moral analysis and buy-in from these key stakeholders here today. So public hearings aren't just enough. We need closed-door meetings where we can have frank conversations. We need to have phone calls. We need to have sit-downs, coffee chats, everything from everybody, especially our key leaders. I would ask the councilors, don't accept the easy answers or the lazy solutions. As a veteran advocate, which I'm not here today as, I'm here today as a citizen, I would ask that we commission a study on the costs and benefits of civil service for the city, analyze the findings, and come to a consensus. There are significant costs that civil service takes on, but as we hear from the diversity and the law issues presented, there's also burdens. Recruit better and smarter using our technological advances, especially in social media. We should know our citizens of diversity. We should know who those people entering the military are. We should know who those people that took the test 4 years ago and are taking it again. That Marine that was just mentioned, he's a friend of mine. If it's the same one, could be a different one. But he grew up in Boston. He went to school in Boston, deployed to Afghanistan, deployed to Iraq, came back and got bypassed for tickets when he was in high school. Doesn't make sense. When it comes to our veteran population and those currently serving in the military, the city's veteran office should be tied in with the recruitment offices and be engaged on finding the city's veterans and militaries of color and the female veterans. Military members come from every neighborhood. The 2 military members from the city of Boston that were added to the memorial in the Seaport District, commissioned by Massachusetts Fallen Heroes, were people of color, were citizens from Roxbury and citizens from the city, and they were of color. So I don't accept that veterans aren't people of color and they aren't people of language. The military just published a study that we have the most diverse military in our history. I hear of the issues that presented before within the community, and I understand that those are issues. Not getting the GI Bill, that's a shame. If he's still alive, if your grandfather's still alive and he wants to use his GI Bill, come talk to us. I'm not sure if he is, but he needs to. He needs to get those benefits, and that applies to everybody. We need to break those barriers within our veteran population and within our city's population. Short-term solutions, I'd suggest more cops on the feet, walking a beat. I run, walk, bike all over Dorchester and Mattapan, and I can't remember the last time I saw a police officer walking, except for answering a call or on a detail. It's summertime. Citizens are outside. Police should be out of their cars and talking to people. It's healthier for the police officer. It's healthier for our environment. It's healthier for our budget with gas and vehicle maintenance savings. And heck, nowadays with the traffic in the city, it's probably even faster. Unrelated note, but I know budget season is upon us. I'd explore whether the city can start utilizing VA vocational rehab funds to pay for veterans to go through our various police, fire, and EMS academies. I don't think we've been doing that. We can set up a way where we can charge the federal government in order to train individuals to go through those academies. Thank you, Madam President. I said I wasn't going to speak today, but as you've seen before, when you send me an invitation email, I write back 2 pages, so can't help myself.
Michael, if you could just state your name and affiliation for the record.
Yeah, Michael Devon, Citizens of Dorchester.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much. I think we have a quick couple follow-ups, and then we're going to try to wrap this up as we have a 1 o'clock right after this. So I just, my quick comment would be thank you for everybody for coming here. And you know, Commissioner Finn, I think one thing that you stated that rings true in my head is that this is a long-term solution, a 3 to 5 year plan where we need to be getting better. And I congratulate Mayor Walsh for hiring the 2 diversity officers who I've met and worked with already. And I think we're moving in the right direction. So I appreciate, you know, Michael and Juan, thank you for always getting back to me right away, and I appreciate that. So I'll continue as the Chair of Public Safety and Criminal Justice. to make sure that we move this forward and we continue to row in the same direction. So I appreciate all your comments. Thank you. Councilor Campbell?
First wanted to thank you, Michael, for that very thoughtful testimony. If you have it in writing, I certainly would appreciate seeing it. Also want to thank Sophia Hall from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice. I know she had to leave for her very thoughtful testimony. Just a quick follow-up question or two, if I may. Commissioner, you'd mentioned that there are 60 firefighters retiring each year and that you now have a class of 60 coming that are being onboarded. And I'm really interested in the diversity numbers of those 60. So how many people are we losing? Like, I feel a deep sense of urgency knowing that we are losing, large numbers of people of color, African Americans, women, whomever, who have come on, who are now retiring, and we're not doing enough to recruit. So if you could just quickly break that down. And then I have one more question around the money.
I don't have them with me today,
Okay,
but
if
I'll
you
get
can
them to you.
another time. That would be very helpful. To Councilor Presley's point around this being an economic justice issue, I'm wondering if you could each quickly state the starting salaries and then average salaries, and then how much of that is included when we talk about we're doing outreach to young people, we're doing outreach to these different groups. So starting salary, average salary, and then how much we kind of talk about that these are really good jobs for the residents in our city.
You're referring to officers, not my salary, correct?
Oh, of course,
Okay.
yes, not yours.
Okay.
And you know what? For the interest of time, we do have another hearing. I'll request that as just a follow-up.
Okay.
If you could get me again, so starting salaries and average salaries would be helpful. And then finally, just again, wanted to say thank you. I think, really important conversation. Clearly not the end of this conversation. As you've already noted, Chief, this is an issue of equity and fairness. This is not about pitting veterans against people of color or people of color against women, et cetera. I think it's important to look at diversity broadly, but to really pay attention to these numbers that we have. So I appreciate you being here and would really like to hear more about what we're doing to ramp things up when we reconvene. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Cheney. Councilor Edwards? Good. Councilor Presley? All set. Councilor Campbell?
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy. Here we go. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Councilor McCarthy, for your partnership in this, and thank you to my colleagues, and Councilor Presley in particular for the continued work that she's been doing with respect to this even before I got to the council. I want to thank Sophia. Obviously, she had to run out, but she was had a lot going on at court, and she made it her business to be here because she cares and she's dedicated. And I think she made that abundantly clear that she wants to be a partner in this work. I know she also talked about Mamleo and the Vulcans, but we also know there are just average, regular citizens who aren't a part of even those groups who care about this issue and want to be a part of the conversation. What I commit to, and I committed to it when filing the hearing order with Councilor McCarthy, was to have a series of conversations. Some of them will be public like this, but frankly, I think the next one will be around a table where we're talking not sort of like this, but with each other and to each other. And I also want to thank Michael, too, for coming. I met Michael, who's a D4 resident and a former Marine and represents, in his formal capacity, a lot of veterans around the time we were having a conversation about a cadet program for the fire department. In the media space, he was probably on the opposite side. We grow to respect, and I think, admire one another and to learn from one another. And what we have come to see is that this is a conversation that requires everyone to be at the table, everyone to feel like they're a part of the conversation, and that we develop a strategic plan that has short-term solutions and long-term solutions. I think we've already articulated some short-term solutions right here during this hearing. that we could start to do, and I think there's some bigger conversations on how we interface with the State House and what we need to do there in that space. Chief Hooley, I also wanted to be a part of this conversation because the work they do as a public safety agency is also very important and often sometimes gets left out of the conversation. I know you didn't get a lot of questions because maybe your numbers are a little bit better, but I appreciate your commitment as well, and we'll continue to keep you and Laura, who's been very helpful as well, as part of these conversations, and Trin, you as well. So the next step will be a conversation around a different table, and we will continue this, and I commit to being that convener. And lastly, I just want to make this two distinctions. One is there very much is state law here that we have to deal with. Even to create a cadet program for the fire department, it requires us to go to the State House, or to do some of the innovative things they're doing in Chicago and other places. We don't have the authority at the city level, and the mayor doesn't have it either, to change those things. So I think a part of these conversations, we need to continue to make sure we make the distinction between city and state law, what we have power and control over and what we don't, and what we want to advocate together to do to change these numbers. I am committed. I am excited for these conversations. I thought this was a great first step. I want to thank you guys again. I want to thank the folks who showed up. I also want to thank Councilor McCarthy again for your partnership. I really appreciate it, and look forward to continuing the dialogue. And we'll be in touch sooner than you think with another date to sit down.
Thank you very much, Councilor Campbell. As we wrap this up, once again, thanks to everybody in the panel. This is docket number 0625. It's a continuing dialogue. It's a policy briefing to explore the recommended diversity initiatives in the city of Boston for public safety agencies. At this time, docket number 0625 is adjourned.